Somebody say nobody can hear me.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first ever Liberty Hangout podcast. My name is Justin. I'm the founder of LibertyHangout.org, and we got a fun show scheduled for tonight. We're going to be talking about what freedom means to us, what the philosophy is, how each of us came to the liberty movement, and ways that you can start living free today. And we're also going to be talking about Bernie Sanders and more. So if we want to start out, just introduce yourselves, guys.
I'll do it. Well, yeah, I'll do it. Well, I'm Roberto Chamorro, and I'm the editor of Liberty Hangout. I live in Maryland, which is close to D.C., and I just like vinyl records and whatnot. And I love the idea of liberty, too. That's all you have to know for now.
I'm Dan. I live in Illinois, and I came to the Liberty movement after watching lots of Stefan Molyneux videos.
Wait, we have
I'm
to discuss how we came to the liberty movement?
Yeah,
Go ahead,
do
yeah,
that
yeah.
afterwards. Liam, want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Liam. I'm in Pensacola, Florida. Currently, I'm from Western North Carolina, though. I'm a Young Americans for Liberty chapter leader at my university, University of West Florida. I was a Democrat, and then I was a Republican, and then I realized they were both bullshit. So now I'm a libertarian turned anarchist. So that's me.
Yeah, I'm James. I am a contributor to LibertyHangout.org. I am a 1L at the Ave Maria School of Law, and I came to the Liberty movement basically by just arguing with people enough where none of my arguments made sense coming from the conservative angle, and I was converted by Ron Paul.
Oh, me too.
And like I said earlier, my name is Justin, and I came to the Liberty Movement as a conservative. You know, I had a mild interest in politics growing up, but I was never really too much into it. By the time I really started looking into it, I saw the contradictions in my philosophy. That's when I started reading some Judge Napolitano books, and that's what turned me to a minarchist libertarian. And then I dove deeper into YouTube. I came across one single Adam Kokesh video, and that's when I really questioned all of my views for the first time and put it into perspective and asked myself, well, wait a minute, why do we even need a government? And so that's where I think we can start the conversation tonight, is that I feel like so many youths, I mean, as exciting as it is to see so many youths coming together excited for the election next year, at the same time, it's mildly disappointing that they see politics as the only avenue. You know, your whole life you're taught that politics is the way. You're taught that you need a government, but when you think about it, government is just pointing guns at people. So when you say we need these people in office, we need those people in office, what you're really saying is that we just need certain people to point guns at other people. So
Yeah,
any thoughts to weigh in on that?
Yeah, and that we also need certain people to read laws for us when we should be able to read those laws ourselves as well too. I mean, we're capable to read about anything basically.
Yeah, that's a good point you raised. I remember when I was reading Ron Paul's book, A Foreign Policy of Freedom, I remember he was discussing in there that when they passed the Patriot Act, that they got maybe, like 10, 15 minutes to read a 1,000-page bill that would completely stifle people's freedom.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's ridiculous that that's even considered. I mean, it's legalized spying. It's just what it is, and just because the government has, I guess, special rights or something, like, I just don't get it. We're all individuals. We all have rights. Government isn't any different. So
Right.
we just look at it like taxation is theft, and that's how it goes.
They say that taxation is theft. For those of our statist viewers, how would you, Dan, explain that taxation is theft?
Well, first I would explain that each individual owns themselves, right? We start at that first axiom, and then we go to say that each individual owns the works they produce, right? So the government has no right to take what you earn. I mean, unless you agree to it, right? And we can't say that we really agree to it by being born. That's called a social contract, and we can prove this empirically by looking at it like this. We can say if we don't pay our taxes, we will be thrown in jail for breaking the law, which is basically an opinion with a gun. There are no principles to laws.
As far as I know, taxation happened in two different ways. One, government siphons money out of your paycheck, which actually happened to me, by the way. And two, every April 15th, you got to pay up or else. And
Yeah.
people don't like that date for some reason. That's what I noticed. I mean, I've known people who stay up on that night paying their taxes, and then the next day they're stressed out. And I'm like, gee, I wonder why.
Well, what do you guys have to say about people that will argue for the social contract, for the fact that because you stay in this country, that, well, now you have to pay taxes because decided that that's what's right, and the majority is that's what you need to do. What would you say to that?
Well, I
I
would
didn't
say,
sign no damn social contract.
yeah, I would say that you can't consent to anything if you aren't even alive before, before the contract is put into play. Like babies can't consent to things. How can babies consent to being taxed?
Matter of fact, I mean, we're living in 2015, and we haven't consented to the U.S. Constitution either. And that was written by how many men again? Like, what, more than 10, less than 20 men?
That was over 200 years ago. So they apparently, the statist argument is that because they wrote the Constitution and signed their names to it, they consented for you.
Exactly. And that's a silly thing to say.
Yeah, and I believe also that the biggest contradiction to that argument there is that a contract requires mutual consent. You know, if I'm going to contract with a company, if I'm going to purchase an iPhone from Apple, there's that mutual agreement there that I'm going to give them money and they're going to provide me with service. And if they don't provide me with that service, well, then I'm entitled to a compensation. When you have that with government, there is no contract. It only binds you. It never binds the state.
I think we should. Oh, go ahead.
That's right, but what would you say to people that would say something like, okay, well, they take your tax dollars and they give you roads and they give you the DMV and they give you all these great things that the state provides?
I think that all the benefits are really contrary to that. That's really just the side of it. Like Adam Kokesh writes in his book Freedom, how government will provide very useful services, but that's really an illusion to cover up the real racket that government is, just to extort you.
Yeah, it's like if a robber came up to you and said, "Give me your $5," and then he gave you a rubber band. Like that would not be consensual, and that would not be enforced in a court.
The truth is, has anyone from not our government, but from that government, has anybody from that government ever came to you guys and say, hey, if you pay this much, you'll get roads, you get buses, you get this, you get that? Has that ever happened?
No, there's no sales
it's
pitch
never
involved.
happened.
Exactly. It's extortion right there.
It's really just as simple as that. I don't know how else to explain it. I mean, the social contract is just an ex post facto reason. You know, it's not valid.
So deviating a little from the social contract, how would you guys put a stamp and a definition on freedom?
I would say freedom is the ability to use voluntary interactions to fill your will or fill your desires.
I would say that the right to be left.
It might cut out a little. Want to repeat that?
Freedom is the right to be left alone.
Freedom is
Right
to be left alone.
I'd say that freedom doesn't have any constraints. For that, laws are evil too.
Yeah, I think that if I had to put a definition on it, I would just say that freedom, like James said, freedom is the freedom to be left alone. Chart your own path so that you leave other people alone too. It's really just that universal.
You know, I don't even believe that this country is actually called the land of the free, considering the amount of laws that happen to exist here. And then people say freedom isn't free. I'm thinking that sounds like cognitive dissonance, right?
Yeah.
Nuts.
Huh. Well, I mean, how are we going to get? This is a question for everybody, but Justin, quarterback in this thing, is how do we get to freedom? Especially if you say, well, freedom isn't it. Well, freedom is free. How do we get there from where we are now? Because obviously we're definitely under some type of tyrannical regime.
I think this ties into what I kind of want to talk about the whole control aspect and how the state keeps us together. You know, their force is very loose in the United States. They don't have to go around actually physically pointing guns at people to coerce us into one monolithic belief. You know, they have all their minions. They own the education. They have this monopoly over the media, and they keep us controlled through all this division. So I think that the most important point here in getting to freedom starts with the education process, going out through social media, just interacting with people and getting across the point of self-ownership. You know, once people can accept the basic premise of self-ownership, you know, then from there we can see, well, how do we move forward? So right now, in my opinion at least, it's really just the education that's really quintessential.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that the education.
Not only like you can't do whatever you want. Like you can tell them little stuff like that. Like you can say in school, if you don't want to say the pledge, you have a choice. You can either recite it or you cannot say it at all. And if you don't say it at all, that's okay. That's your choice right there. You're not even hurting a soul.
Didn't you once say you got detention for not speaking the pledge?
Yeah, I did. Like when I was in the 8th grade. A friend of mine was like, Roberto, let's see what happens when we don't stand for the pledge. And I thought, well, okay. So I didn't stand. And my teacher, she was like, Roberto, why didn't you stand? And I'm thinking, well, my other history teacher ain't here. I mean, he doesn't care. And she's like, well, I'm not your history teacher. And I'm like, you know. Then she kicked it off. The only punishment I got was not going to this 8th grade dance, which I could care less about, but I suppose that was my first taste of what freedom actually meant.
I think that's your first taste of what tyranny was, not freedom.
Well, for me personally, it's freedom because I went against the tide. And I'm the kind of person that always went against the tide, too.
Yeah, that's a good point there. James, you had something to add about the education?
The first thing is, I think we have to take a step back and look, because as libertarians, we get a little stuck in our ways, and we think people like, look, what incentive is there for the education system, especially the government education, to allow dissenters among their ranks? Because I mean, why would you not make every kid stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance? Why would you not make government text? Why would you not make them read certain authors that promote the state? I mean, this is what we're looking at now. Is we're looking at a pronged system in which everything is geared towards indoctrination. I mean, if you look at any great society that ever lived, and when I say great, I mean that in quotation marks with a lot of sarcasm behind it. But what are we looking at? I mean, you look at ancient Rome, ancient Greece. They all promoted their societies. They all promoted the state. I mean, you look at like a political philosopher like Leo Strauss, who was a Nazi. I mean, he said that patriotism was your first calling in life, that your country was the first calling, then your family, then everything else.
This sounds awfully familiar.
Say that again?
It sounds awful familiar.
That's what
We hear the same rhetoric here in the United States. If you don't stand behind the troops, stand in front of them.
Yeah. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican in that standard. And that's kind of part of the issue now is, you know, people talk about, you know, bipartisan bills and bipartisan support as if it's a good thing. But, you know, George Carlin said, you know, that's when you need to be worried the most is, you know, when both of the parties, that means they're both getting together to screw you. You know, they both agree, like, here's what we're going to do to, you know, screw them this time. We're going to take money for this and force them all to do that. And, you know, we're all going to be together on this because usually what they do isn't really aimed towards freedom.
Yeah, usually if there's bipartisanship in Congress, you can expect it's for the wrong reasons, not for the right ones.
Yeah, and if you look at even just like the psychology of a politician, a lot of the times they'll have they just fiend for power. So it's like these like damaged people that there is no other position in society that would fulfill their like damaging desires other than a politician. So that's why we have these career politicians that and they all team up and they'll make the laws and that will set us backwards.
You know what else I noticed?
For you guys, go ahead, Roberto.
You know what else I noticed too? Speaking of politicians, on TV they always have an amount of people standing behind them. I'm thinking, why do you wait? Why is that even set up? Like during the election season. I mean, have you guys ever noticed that about how?
That's all the propaganda.
Yeah, it's like the illusion that they have a lot of support.
I mean, I have yet to see a candidate who's only speaking when there's nobody behind him. I would love to see that. Honestly,
Ron Paul, 2012. He drew the large crowds of thousands, and there were no cameras there to see it.
There's a
Well, that's because the crowds were in front of him, not behind him.
That's a good point right there.
Yeah.
James, you wanted to add on to that?
there's an app that you can go to and buy crowds for your events. And
Yeah.
I think I heard about that actually.
Yeah.
Buy crowds into your events. Wow.
market need for it.
Yeah, it just goes how far they're willing to go to try and get the illusion that they have a lot of supporters, and I mean, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. It's not a numbers game. We're just trying to convince people.
Right. That's actually been my mission on Twitter so far, like educating people on the ideas of liberty and the right kind of history too.
What do you think? What do you guys think is really, because education is really the best step forward to moving towards a free society? How do you guys see is the best tool to actually educate people right now and get them to listen and not fear, quote, anarchy?
Well, I've always had this philosophy of the matrix, and I see, we can use this as like a analogy for a lot of things, but I look at it in terms of politics. So we can see the status, and there's a lot of people that don't really pay attention, and I would consider them like the people who would take the blue pill, and they're in the matrix, and they don't understand the true nature of government. And then you kind of have like the people kind of violet, purple, somewhere in that range in the middle where people are kind of like starting to learn about libertarianism and freedom and their ideas, and they're kind of like bouncing it around in their head, but they're not really sure about it. And then I think you have the people like us who are kind of the red pill people who have just like accepted the true nature of government. So if we're looking at it in that context, I would say that we, as the red pill people, we are scarce. There are not a lot of us, so we need to go around and just plant little tiny red pills in the blue pill people so they can turn violet and purple, and then they can eventually go to red. Because it's a process. I mean, it takes a long time. You can't just use one sentence to dismiss somebody's whole ideology. It just doesn't. I mean, as you guys can see, we debate with people on Twitter and Facebook every single day. How many people actually change?
Yeah. Another problem is it's a personal, internal process that people go through when it comes to that. Like, you never do it, among a crowd of people, because it's not like an indoctrination or, bringing yourself into a church or a political party or whatever. You don't have people behind you saying, yeah, no, this is the right thing to do. You're doing it by yourself. And that's why a lot of people, if they dip their toes in and they don't like it, they'll back off, which is why, when you have an argument with somebody like that on Facebook or on Twitter or whatever, it's not so likely that they're going to, after that 140 characters, understand, okay, you're right, and I'm an anarchist now. But, it's it being an internal thing, it makes it a lot more difficult for people to actually, really think about it, because not a lot of people want to think about politics in general more than about an hour a year, when they're about to go vote. But, that's kind of what people need to do, and, just actually look inside of them and understand that, they really do need to, think about, maybe it isn't the Republicans that are right or the Democrats that are right. It's the people that, it's tyranny and freedom, which one are you going to go for?
To be honest, if I do talk about politics in public, at least with people that I know personally, I try to set my words up in a non-biased way, if that makes sense, with common sense.
Yeah.
I remember the last time I ever spoke about politics to anybody that I knew, it was with a friend of mine. He was ranting about Donald Trump, about how he he wants Republican to unite Latino voters. I'm Latino, but I'm not going to vote at all because I believe that voting is like an act against somebody else. Like you want to use force. You know, I believe that you should be able to do whatever you want, and that voting hinders freedom. No, that's besides my point. Point is, I told the guy, well, if you want to get what you want, why don't you start doing that right now? I mean, you don't need to vote. I mean, Gandhi didn't get Indian independence by voting. Like, he did that himself. I brought up stuff like that, and he was like, whoa, you have a good point, but I don't want to vote. So I just left it at that.
Yeah, and part of the problem when it comes to that is, are you done? There we go. Yeah, so, voting is kind of like taking the responsibility off of yourself. Like, I'm going to vote for Bernie Sanders because I think that there's too many people that are experiencing poverty right now. I'm going to vote for Bernie Sanders because I think there's way too many millionaires. But, that train of thought is kind of inherently flawed because you're going to vote for somebody who's going to point guns at people and tell them to give their property to other people, and whether or not they got that, or they deserve to get that property or not, it's their property, and it's not.
At times, it's not that you're getting threatened by guns. It's more like an arrest, really.
Yeah, but still, no, I mean, you don't pay your
resist arrest,
taxes,
yeah.
then they're going to throw you in jail. And if you don't go to jail, they're going to shoot you.
Right.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
regardless, but it's besides the point. If you vote, you're getting rid of your responsibility to do what needs to be done, and it's creating a shitload of apathy. And that's a really big problem that I see. Is once you start talking politics, people's eyes just glaze over. A lot of times, especially with millennials.
You just raised a pretty good point, Liam, about how it creates a culture of apathy. I was actually considering writing a piece for the website that I was going to title "The Psychology of Apathy," where I was going to go into how people know that the world is kind of screwed up. They know the gig of government, they know the gig of corporations. Yet when we're out here speaking about it, no one wants to hear another bad cop story. That's why I feel like it's our duty when we're going out to educate people. We want to give them something enlightening, something they can feel positive about. And that's where I think the message of freedom begins.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
And that's, one of the things that I really like about Adam Kokesh, and it's funny, I only really discovered him maybe like 2 or 3 months ago, but what I like about him is how positive he is and how he spins anarchism, and it's not even that he spins it, but the way that he talks about it, it's
We just
in
lose them?
general are really, sorry?
I think you just cut out for a second.
Oh, you did? Okay. Am I good now?
Yeah, it seems so.
Okay, yeah. So, and Adam Kokesh, he's very positive with the way that he presents anarchism and presents liberty.
Yeah, that's like
As a way to kind of free, your thinking. And that's a really good way to get people, at least to start thinking about it, is to speak of it in a positive way and not just say, all right, everything's messed up, but my way is the least messed up, or we at least acknowledge that it's messed up. He actually says, like, this is the way that you make proper changes by being a libertarian and direct action and all that stuff. And that's I feel like it's hitting the nail on the head, and it's really hitting a lot of people positively, which I love, and I hope that more people are like that.
So then would you say that when we're spreading the message of liberty, we have to spread the message of happiness first? So we kind of pitch it to people like, hey, you want to be happy? Is your life miserable? Are you in a lot of debt from going to college? You can't find a job?
You definitely could, of course. And I mean, it differs from person to person, especially when you're speaking to an individual person, especially somebody that you know. It's always good to kind of cater to their thoughts, their feelings, their insecurities, and things like that. If you know somebody that they're not too far from the breadlines. Like, I work in a minimum wage job. I have a lot of people that are worried about, losing their jobs and things like this, and they want the minimum wage raised. And, we all know the fallacy behind that. If you force a company to pay twice as much as they're paying right now, they're probably going to get rid of half their people and make the rest of the people do twice the work. And it might be okay for those people that remain, but the people that get kicked out of that job aren't really going to be too happy. And if you're worried about security and job security and things like that, you can talk about if we were in an economy where $5 is worth what $5 was worth in the 1915 or in 1915 when around the time that the Federal Reserve was started, we wouldn't have an issue because things would just be so much cheaper and so much easier to purchase and buy, and you would actually be able to save from a minimum wage job. But nowadays you can't, and it's because of the Democrats and the Republicans.
And neither of them want to get rid of the Federal Reserve. It's just like they don't care. But that's a whole other issue.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to get rid of the Federal Reserve because they believe in fiat money. Well, that's just one of the reasons.
Yeah. James, you had something to add on?
Jump in for a second because, bro, I fucking hate the word anarchist. Like, times I've said I'm an anarchist, and people just discount you off the bat, close their ears, they look the other way. And it's getting to that point almost with libertarian, because you say you're a libertarian, and all of a sudden people go, oh, Rand Paul. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
I'm close to agreeing with you. So the best way, I think, and this goes back to the question that was asked way earlier, was how do we allow people to get out of their own way? And I think the best way to do that is through what Plato Socrates calls the material dialectic, which is basically just argue. Just argue with them till because at the end of the day, we believe our ideas are right. We believe that logically, I mean, not even that we're right, but just logically, ours make the most sense. I mean, people that are logical come to conclusions, they're not asleep. So if you're arguing with someone, and I love to argue, so let's put that aside for right now. That's probably why I'm in law school. But was arguing with people and me trying to give them the old saying that, well, Paris hate us because of all this shit, and just like getting destroyed. I was literally getting destroyed by libertarians. And that's what changed because it didn't make a lot of sense in my head. And I think that's the same thing we have to do for a lot of things, especially domestic, what's happening domestically. I mean, there's so many things that don't make logical sense that can't, as anarchists, as voluntarists, we can't just sit back and say, well, we'll try this and we'll try to softball them in. Sometimes hard power is power, and you've got to show them how asleep they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely, I think so. But I mean, it's kind of like the don't wake up the sleepwalker while they're sleepwalking or they'll go insane. I really do think that it's a gradual process. And, with some people that might work, but with a lot of people you're going to turn them right off. I mean, they're going to think you're talking a bunch of insanity, and maybe a couple more years down the line they might revisit it, and there's a small chance that they'll actually accept it. But I don't think that, as a general rule, that's the way to go. I mean, and it might be the more ideologically consistent way to go, but I don't think that that just pushing them into the pool is a good way to go.
Yeah, I think some people definitely would respond more to that, especially when you kind of got them in, and but you just want to give them a little kick, Yeah. I think that would be a great way to get those type of people in. But I think if you're just coming straight off the bat trying to explain it to them, you have to be very calm and just sound rational. And I think Adam Kokesh put up a video of him using nonviolent communication.
Yep, I was there that day.
Yeah. Justin was there. So I just think that would be a very effective way to get people to look at the liberty movement in a different light.
Definitely, yeah. And I think that, another thing is, you represent, your ideologies with everything that you do. If people know you as the anarchist, as they do, at my job and my group of friends, I'm the anarchist, I'm definitely going to be a model person. I'm the nice guy. I give people rides. I help people out when they need help. And it's because I believe that, voluntary interaction is the way to go, and I want to be the model person that people want to look up to and say, this guy's the same age as me, this guy's younger than me, but he's got it so much more put together than somebody else. And I really do think that it's because we were talking about this a little bit last night. It's because our ideologies are so pure, and they're not riddled with logical fallacies, like a Republican or a Democrat or a socialist or whatever. Because when you do that, I really do think that in your mind it just doesn't sit properly, and because of that, you start to not be happy in general a lot of times, and a lot of people can't put a finger on it, but I really do think that that's part of it, because I'm always happy to get up in the morning, and I'm always happy to do what I'm doing, even though I work at Best Buy. Like, it's not like the most amazing life in the world, but I think it's because I want to be the model citizen, and I want to help people out and do this, and be part of this, and spread the ideas of liberty, that I do have a happy life, and I think that can kind of rub off on people.
James, you were going to add on?
I didn't do a very good job of explaining what I meant. I didn't mean scream, add, but I engage on a dialogue. Engage them, especially if we're proposing principles. Engage them when they answer those principles with their own.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah, definitely.
do it in a respectful manner. I think, especially the nonviolent communication, I think is an awesome way to go. I think that as we progress, I think more and more we're going to have how to engage in dialectics, engage in debate, and the best routes to do that. Now, what I'll tell you what happened to me was people engaged me, and I argued back as hard as I could with my "Let's go America, all that stuff that I used to believe, and I did it at the time, and I tried to do as best I could, and then I went and there's a great line in A Few Good Men where he goes, "Deep down in a place you can't talk about at parties." And when I sat on my bed and I looked inside myself, it ate away at me, because the principles that were being espoused to me just made sense. And the more I denied them, the more it ate away at me.
Do you guys think that a statist goes to bed happy at night? What do you think?
Not at all.
I mean, I could see, especially if you think you're on the right side, as a lot of these emotional Americans do.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I definitely think that it's more of a matter of they don't really understand. So that's why they are. It's like the ignorance is bliss sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, but people go out and they thank Marines for their service, and that makes them feel good about themselves. Go home.
Yeah.
And that's.
Yeah, they don't like to think about the unjust wars and drone killing and the horrible.
They like to think about Cecil the Lion.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And Kim
Jesus
Kardashian.
And the Confederate flag.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a friend on Facebook who's pretty SJW, but she posted a picture, and it was the comment was well-behaved women rarely make history, or whatever the trope is, but it was a picture of the black woman that climbed up the flagpole and took the Confederate flag down. But it pissed me off so much to see it, and it's not like I'm pro-Confederacy or anything, but you see them taking that flag down in Columbia, South Carolina, and people are just screaming and crying and applauding like they just took down a dictator. But
yeah, it's a flag.
So they can rest easy for another month and a half, knowing that, oh yeah, we got rid of that flag, because that flag is what kills millions of people every year. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I wonder about that. The stars and stripes. How many more dead people that's flown over, and things like that. And that's why, I try not to get into the flag debate too much, because people just get so crazy defensive over that piece of cloth, and a lot of times you usually end up just kind of pushing people away more than you bring them in. But that just pissed me off so much, and I didn't comment on it or anything like that. But the next time I talk to her on the phone, I'm gonna tell her about that and just be like, you should not be that happy about that. Yeah, I think
How would you guys say is an effective matter of getting people to take a step back from all their raw emotion and just think of things rationally?
hmm yeah, and that's why I think in this same person we didn't talk for probably like 6 months or so because I just got so mad at her one time. I just clicked end of the phone call, unfriended her, didn't talk to her for a long time because she is this big third wave feminist and she believes a lot of these fallacies and things that they like to throw around, but you're just like, regardless of what you think about the pay gap and all this other BS that they're throwing around, you can't think that that is something that you need to talk about more than the 15% literacy rate for women in Saudi Arabia or something
Yeah.
along those lines. Like, if you really are worried about women, then you should be talking about that and not and
Oh
not
yeah.
how because every single woman in the U.S. Works only 77% of the amount of hours that every single man in the U.S. works, and that's why there's a 23% difference.
Well, yeah,
In
it's all the illusion. It's just more propaganda to spin false narratives and just try and distract the public from what's actually happening. The more ideology that's pushed out through the mainstream media, the more you know what's going on behind the curtains with bankers and politicians.
Yeah, and I love seeing this every once in a while, seeing a little bit of this red pill stuff that my friends will post, not even thinking about it, but it's just like there's one that I'm sure you guys have seen at some point scrolling through Facebook, and it was like the media always wants us to think in black versus white or Christian versus Islam or South versus North and Democrat versus Republican, and the way to get your way as a people is to unite and say this is the freedom that we want. And I took a little bit of an artistic integrity in describing it, but it really was, it's not supposed to be black versus white. We're humans, and
Yeah, it even appeals to our base like psychology being tribe, coming from hunter gatherers, and I mean we were in tribes and stuff like that, and we evolved into these societies and states. And it's almost like we're trying to shed that just basic, like, primitive instinct.
I think
So it really is.
I think even us as voluntarists, we're just as susceptible to dividing people and putting people into categories. Like, we like to think of people as anarchists and statists, but rarely do we really realize that the average run-of-the-mill statist is just as much a victim of the state as we are. We tend to lump them in as statists, and we put them in this category as if they're of the same moral equality as the state itself, when we really need to be coming more together and coalescing with them and realizing, hey, you're my brother, you're just as much victimized of this as I am.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Justin. And a lot of times we like to think of every single person that proposes a new law or proposes this and that as the same person that says, anybody that tries to resist a cop or anybody that does this should be shot, because they're not the same. There are some people that are just that much further into their Stockholm Syndrome mentality where they think that the state is going to do everything to protect them. People that are that much further in seem to think that they can do no wrong. But, the people that are kind of out here that are just a little bit, they're less into being a Democrat or less into being a Republican or even less into being a Libertarian, they're not the same. So, it's kind of the same thing. You can't really group people into anarchist and statist and even libertarian and anarchist. Because even a Rand Paul supporter, you can turn them to even further into freedom, but calling them a statist isn't the way to do it. So I do agree with that.
Go ahead, James.
I'll be back, guys.
That everyone, whether they be Republican, statists, or anarchists, we're all looking for the same kind of outcome. We're all looking to be more free. We're all looking to. Now, certain people have different ways to achieve that, and they think, and they've been indoctrinated that well, the best way to cure poverty is to tax 90%. And where we come in as soldiers, that's what we are. We're at soldiers, come in and combat these people with logic and freedom.
I mean, yeah, I couldn't say I disagree with that. That sounds pretty rational.
Now, what would you guys say? How would you really handle the person that refuses? They're just so blind, either blind or ignorant, and they refuse to see the state for what it is, as much as you get across that it is aggression. How would you guys go about interacting with people that remain hostile and remain to do anything about it? Are those interactions not worth having?
Basically. I
Yeah,
mean,
go ahead.
personally, with my family, I'll revisit it at different times, and I was on a car. I went out to North Carolina again, and my sister went up there as well. We're both in college down here in Florida, and we took a ride over to South Carolina to visit my stepdad's family, and just before we took that 4 or 5 hour ride, my mom and I had this big argument about the roads. And she literally said, and I quote, "But who will build the roads?" And I'm like, "How about you, you civil engineer and punk?" But so it got to this point because she grew up in Northern Ireland. She grew up in the Troubles, where it was objectively worse than the civil rights movement, and how blacks were treated after the abolition of slavery. For a couple of different reasons, but like I said, last night, they were within spitting distance of a police station, and that it wasn't really an option to call the police because they were Catholic, and she'll still support them here, and I think it's because she thinks that they're less corrupt here, and to a degree she's right, but what I did was basically the entire car ride over, they were having a conversation, and every time they said something like, "Oh, I don't like this," I just say, "Oh, they should ban that. They should really ban that because you don't like it." And they'd start laughing, and I'm just like, "Well, that's your mentality. So they should ban Pepsi because you like Coke." And hopefully they'll see the light. I think my sister might, because she's only a year older than me, but my mom will probably be stuck in her ways forever and ever. But I really do think that if you care about somebody enough, you need to keep revisiting it. And I do that with my girlfriend as well. But she really does a pretty good job of at least dealing with my rants and things like that. But I think that if it's somebody that you're never going to really see again or talk to again, unless you go out of your way to do it, and it's wasting your time that could be spent, doing something that's a lot better for you, then there's really no reason to stick around, because there's always going to be people that think stupid shit.
Now, what about when we're having dialogues with people that have a great sense of entitlement? Any recommendations there to kind of break that barrier?
That's a good question, actually, because coming from a liberal background, I can kind of see. I don't really know how that got resolved for me. I think it was just logic.
Yeah, I feel like it is too. And I mean, it's kind of funny if you look at on YouTube Bernie Sanders talking about universal health care and things like that, and Rand Paul's his dissenting of that opinion, and he said basically, like, you can call healthcare a human right, but healthcare requires somebody to do something, and to do something that you would otherwise pay them for. So requiring them to do that is a form of slavery. And it's I found it crazy to hear that come out of Rand Paul's mouth, but it really did. It made sense, So I think that when you talk about entitlements, a lot of times people don't want to see the light if they're on entitlements and things like that, or they're begging for entitlements, and that's why I've had a lot more success with Republicans. However, if you really have an intellectual and you talk about how maybe if 50 to 60% of our income didn't go towards some kind of taxation, we would all be able to afford what we needed to, and maybe if there weren't monopolistic, factors in the market, things would be much cheaper. And maybe this and maybe that. And if you got somebody that's an intelligent person, they'll understand that. But if they're on entitlements, they're probably not even gonna, they might understand that, but they're gonna keep voting Democrat because they want more free shit. And and you might turn them, but they're not gonna tell you.
Yeah, and it also comes with, like I was talking about yesterday in the chat, there's the R versus K reproductive strategy that Stefan Molyneux talks about. and he says that the R-selected people, they just, I mean, they won't care. Like they don't care if the economy is going to collapse because it's just in their epigenetics to not see long-term consequences of things like the dollar collapse and the Federal Reserve and all that stuff. So it's, for some people, it's just, I mean, you really can't convince them. It's just their epigenetics.
Definitely.
You think maybe a good way of trying to convince people of these things is really to show them and expose them to just how controlled they are? Like you pointed out about the Federal Reserve. Every time a dollar you have today, it's infinitely losing its value. That right there is an invisible tax over you. That's a form of control. Like, I think if we start driving home, like, hey, use Bitcoin here. It's unregulated. It's deflationary. Take control of your own life and your own finances. That's real personal mental freedom.
Yeah, a lot of people think about it like they're getting rewarded when they turn 21 or when they turn 16 and they can finally drive or drink alcohol or whatever.
Yeah, that's not freedom. That's permission.
Yeah, it's not. It's just permission. Like, I should have been able to drive when I was freaking 15 if I was responsible enough. I mean, why should there just be arbitrary limits on things that are just, it's just an opinion. Really, there's not really anything to it.
You guys want to talk Bernie Sanders?
Sure,
I was
man.
waiting for that.
All right, who wants to go first? Actually, let me add on. I have a little prelude to that. I think it's interesting to see just how far we've come as a nation, to see that this year in the presidential elections we have perhaps the two most radical candidates in U.S. presidential history, with Bernie Sanders on the left and Donald Trump on the far right. So I feel like back in 2008, 8 years ago, everyone felt like we had a messiah, we had a savior to fix the system. His name was Barack Obama. Here we are 8 years later, ready for 2016. People are falling for the same thing again. What do you guys think here about big old Bernie?
What can we say? Honestly, Bernie Sanders, he knows, I'll give him credit, he knows what to say. I mean, he knows that people respond to like, if he says that, oh yeah, healthcare should be a human right, that everyone's gonna start applause and start yelling and screaming and saying, feel the burn, I mean, it's just, people like to have free stuff, and it goes along with that R versus K stuff. A lot of people, they just don't see the long-term consequences of Bernie Sanders' policies, and there's a lot of fact twisting involved with the liberal media and stuff like that.
You got something to add, James?
The Democrats as a party tend to hate white privilege, tend to hate old white guys running things. But they want to elect Bernie Sanders to run 300 million some odd people, which is kind of humorous.
So what would you have to say about his proposal? I find it really interesting and contradictory that the biggest opponents of the police state support a guy that wants to steal 90% of your wealth. Do they honestly imagine that electing a guy like that into office is really going to go over well for the police state? Is it really going to voluntarily cede and not be going to businesses' doors to fork over their wealth?
Mm-hmm.
People aren't getting our perspective. They're not thinking for themselves most of the time. They're getting their info from MSNBC, and they're saying, wow, that sounds great. I'm going to get this, this, and this. And they never think of where it comes from. They never think of the effects on the economy. They never think of the Federal Reserve and quantitative easing and the inflation on the money. They never think. And that's where we got to come in. What the fuck are you thinking about?
Yeah, I saw a good quote earlier from Murray Rothbard, who was actually on a meme of Rothbard was sitting above Bernie Sanders, and the quote wrote, "It is easy to be conspicuously, quote, compassionate if others are forced to pay for the cost."
Oh yeah, definitely.
I always like the Winston Churchill quote saying that you should judge a policy more by how it actually works than how it's proposed. And I totally butchered that, but he basically just said, like, you can say all you want to, but, once it's actually put into practice, that's when you should really start to get critical.
Yeah, and I just hate how Bernie Sanders will misconstrue Scandinavian socialism and not really. He'll talk about the good aspects of it and not say anything about the bad, of course. And then people get this idea that socialism is like the fine line between communism and full-on capitalism. So they just think it's like the middle ground and they're just being rational, when really that's just not true.
Definitely, and I mean we touched on this a little bit the other day. My dad's side of the family's from Iceland, and Iceland has a population of about 300,000, which is about the same as St. Louis, Missouri, right? So if you had a socialistic system that was just completely walled off with that amount of people, it's going to be a lot. I don't want to say more successful, but a lot less unsuccessful than, at 300 million people. That's a 1 to 1,000 difference. 1,000 times bigger is what he's proposing than Iceland. And, a couple hundred times bigger when it comes to other Scandinavian countries that I'm not as familiar with. But, their brand of socialism might work okay for them, but they still don't have, if you think about Iceland and you think about France and you think about really overly socialist countries, when was the last time you saw, the best new car or the best, new cell phone or the best, invention come out of one of those countries? They stifle that inventive, spirit by saying that, if you make the next Facebook, you're not going to be a billionaire. You're going to be the same as everybody else. So you're not going to get that incentive. And I saw Bill Frezza at Auburn University, I think late last year or early this year, talk about that. And he kind of did a little segue into net neutrality and was talking about, once net neutrality really gets kind of pushed in and, now they have their foot in the door. So once they really start to, implement more and more socialist policies when it comes to the internet and when it comes to, phones in general and things like that, this smartphone that I'm talking to you guys on over the internet, and the reason that we're all able to talk right now is because between like the late 80s and now, there was this huge renaissance of electronic, inventions and things like that, and we all know that, but we, generally the American people don't really like to accept the fact that it was because of the increase in freedom that we received when the hands were kind of taken off of cell networks and things like that, when there weren't as many regulations, and when you impose new regulations on the internet and things like that. I mean, the internet used to be anarchy. You used to have YouTube comments, they were all the same. Everybody, I could start a website and a billionaire could start a website, and generally, they're before you start using your money and things like that.
$15.
Exactly. And you have that ability. You can be collecting welfare and start a website or something like that. You can be a homeless person, walk into a Best Buy, because I know this because I've done it before, and you can go set up a $20 Android phone with a $30 a month phone subscription. And that's why if you talk to 100 homeless people, I guarantee at least half of them are going to have a smartphone, and they're starting to network and they're starting to get out of that because they're able to call people and get interviews and all this stuff. And it's only happened because of the increase in freedom that we've had when it comes to the internet and cell networks and things like that. And not a lot of people point that out, but I really do think it's something that needs to be pointed out.
Yeah, I think kind of tailing off to what you were saying before about the Scandinavian nations, I think it's a little appalling to me how they spin it that it's the happiest place on earth, yet they have rampant violent crime, they have the highest suicide rates in the world. What's going on there?
Yeah, I know. I know that Iceland doesn't really have a violence problem nearly as much, but I will say that the rates of alcoholism and depression and suicide are exponentially higher than in a lot of more economically free countries, and it's because you don't even have the opportunity, you don't even have the dream of getting to be like Jay-Z or one of those people. And obviously we all know the odds of us actually becoming something like that, but just to have the freedom to get there, is kind of it's a release in and of itself. And people are starting to realize that there's not as much class mobility as we would like, but instituting socialism and things like that is not the way to increase class mobility. I mean, it's the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, if they really cared about class mobility, then they would want a free market so that everyone can, be able to start up a business tomorrow if they wanted to with the right amount of capital. But instead, we have to jump through status hoops, and it'll take 3 years. I mean, that's the reason why we have a class divide. We have huge corporations that want to impose these barriers to entry so that the guy next door can't start up a business until 5 years in the future when he's got all of his paperwork done.
Exactly, yeah, and you shouldn't need 50 permits to start selling something to somebody else to make a living and provide for your family. That's insane.
Where I think we reach Bernie Sanders supporters and socialists. And everyone hold on to your heads. I'm going to get a little right now, and you're going to think I'm out of my mind. But MCAPs are socialists. Or should be. We should all be socialists. But the only difference between us and a Sanders supporter is we believe in voluntary socialism.
There we go. Yeah.
Well, when you... Oh, were you talking?
Sure.
Okay. Go ahead.
Part out, and then you go for it. But all I was saying is I believe people should give up their money to build roads. I believe people should give their money to the poor. I believe people should give their money to take care of their families. However, I don't think this should be done at the barrel of a gun. And that is the difference between us.
Exactly.
Yeah, but the problem is with reaching them is they think that government is the only way to provide like a welfare sort of system for people and safety nets when we could really just do it voluntarily.
Yeah, and
it's interesting how they kind of spin off voluntarism as this chaotic theory when in reality they're the ones proposing pointing guns at 320 million people to figure out how to build a road. I mean, we build computers peacefully. We put together, you get your paper, just about everything you can buy in the market, that's all done peacefully and voluntarily. And that's why I made my last video where I made the assertion that everyone's an anarchist and they just don't know it yet. Every single time, like this right here, this conversation, this is an example of anarchy. We didn't need to get together because someone held a gun to our head, We just found mutual benefit and value in it, so we decided to do so peacefully and voluntarily.
Yeah, and I mean, just like what you said, think about the car that's sitting out in the driveway. Nobody had a gun put to their head to tell them to make that. Mm-hmm. And you also need to think about how intricate and complex an automobile is, and then think about all the constraints that the government, or that governments in general have put on, automobiles and things like that, and then think about if they were all lifted. People are always going to want a safe vehicle because they're going to be carting their kids around, and people, some people might not want a safe vehicle. People might want the lightest possible vehicle. People might want the most economical vehicle, and things like that. So, think about if we didn't have the same constraints and the same rules when it came to making an automobile. We think about what the car outside would look like and feel like and how economical it might be or how fast it might be or whatever if there weren't those constraints.
Yeah, I think quite honestly you'd be seeing flying cars right now, some sort of little taxi drones that'll just pick you up and drop you off somewhere else.
Yep.
All the potential is so untapped and it's out there. We're falling greatly short because of all these constraints.
Oh yeah, definitely. I know Adam Kokesh loves talking about that stuff.
Yeah.
Flying cars.
Oh yeah. Well, it's just so interesting to think about just the free market being actually free. Just think of how many different inventions there would be. Think of how effective things could be created. Competition, lower prices. It's a self-sustaining system, and we often, the statists often get this idea that the free market has no checks and balances when really, it's a self-sustaining system. There doesn't need to be any checks and balances because if the guy next door is doing something dirty, then you could just out him and create your own business, and then you'll get all his customers. I just never understood this magical thinking of how leftists think corporations, or how leftists think the free market works.
Yeah, and I mean, shitty companies are only able to stay shitty when they're protected by the government and when people are apathetic. And in a voluntary society, neither of those things would happen. So
Deregulate.
yes, I mean, we wouldn't have Foxconn, making Apple and HTC phones over in China and installing nets to, keep their workers from killing themselves when they throw themselves out the window. We wouldn't have that if people were more conscious of things that happen like that. And
I think you just maybe. I'm sorry for interrupting here, but
No worries.
while it's fresh on my mind, I just thought of something. Let's say that there was Ancapistan tomorrow, and we had real true freedom, and you would see all these jobs import back to the U.S. But how do you think that would have an effect on the global market overall? Like, think of all the nations like China, Venezuela, Thailand, Vietnam, where all these American companies have exported jobs over there because of all the rising costs of taxation here. How would that play out over there, and how would we be able to get capitalism back into those countries since all the jobs would be coming back to the United States, or whatever
Well,
this land would be called?
It's like Ron Paul says, his foreign policy is, get the fuck out of there. There's no reason to be there unless they're aggressing against us. And it's the same thing when it comes to capitalism and the way that we run ourselves as a country. We are setting an example. People look to the United States, and people, even if there weren't a government tomorrow, people would look to the big, huge landmass that's filled with 320 million people. And it'd probably be a lot more if there weren't a United States government, to be completely honest. But when you think about the way that people look to us, and if they see that amount of freedom, they would want to move that way. So I think that once one of these big countries like the US or the UK or whatever actually accepts voluntarism, which is, unfortunately, it's a long way off, more than likely.
You think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm going to remain optimistic, obviously, but still, once that actually does happen, I think they'll start falling like dominoes. It's kind of like the spread of communism. It's going to be like that. Say what?
James, you got something to say?
I think it's a great question, Justin. I think that, okay, well, they're eating shit and we're over here eating a 4-course meal, and I think the proof is in the pudding, right? So that would be the answer to that question. Well, it's going to fucking go crazy and, I mean, just continue along the road to destruction. Well,
Who joined?
so much. However, the question that was asked to me during my senior dissertation was, how are you, if you put 3 people in a room, promote a voluntary society while knowing that people are so easily alienated, that there are people and hate people, and that there's never really going to be a decentralization to a point where try to take advantage, and people aren't going to try to centralize a system like that.
I think you may have to say that all over again. Your mic cut out.
How are we as a people? Because you put 3 people in a room, one person is going to come out with all the shit. That was what was posed to me.
Mm-hmm.
How are we, knowing that people are so indoctrinated, so easily indoctrinated, and that there are people who hate people, supposed to ever think that state isn't going to that centralization?
I think to answer that, I mean, I saw you answer in your video, but the real answer is that in a stateless society, people would not accept statism because we would just see it as generic crime. If you or I did what the state did, we'd be in jail by morning, and that's how people would view it.
Definitely.
Right, but why don't we do that way now?
Because people have these moral contradictions where they say, okay, I can't hit people, but if you have a shiny badge on, then apparently you can. So that's why it's our job right now to uncondition people to point out those moral inconsistencies.
State existed for thousands of years, and that's not an accident. But what is it that it's not state that have argued anarchism since, I mean, way back when? I mean, I don't even know when the first was. I would say I really don't know. So why is it recurring, and what is it that we can do?
Again, I didn't hear anything you just said.
is for thousands of years and has been reoccurring. No matter how many revolutions, there's been a bunch of revolutions. Who it could have been Jesus Christ, but how are we supposed to stop the state from returning when knowing that there's such a flaw in the human being pool?
Anyone else catch that?
No, not 100%.
People at the
I
end.
mean, nod your head if I got this correct. Are you saying that how are we, because people are so indoctrinated, how are we going to be able to topple the state? Is that what you said?
The state keeps reoccurring for thousands of years.
Okay, so you're saying the state keeps reoccurring. How are we going to prevent it from reemerging again?
First, anarchists. There's been anarchists as far back as there's been a state.
Yep.
We supposed to bridge that gap when there's such a huge flaw in human beings that this.
Here's how. Here's how. We have technology.
Yeah.
I think
Technology
that's
is going to
simple.
be...
We get everything, as Adam Kokesh calls it. You have a truth button in your pocket. You can know what someone in Iran is doing at the click of a button to see if their government really wants to blow you up right now.
Yet we're still arguing for an intervention policy. People are still signing up to join the military. So there's people that are massive tensions. Always happen. Always think they're following. They'll lead the state and lead into something that will turn tyrannical.
Well,
I think a lot of that too. But you want to go first, Dan?
yeah, I was going to say, well, I kind of see what he's saying, because humans have been socially conditioned and even genetically conditioned to just submit to authority. If you think for over thousands of years that we've existed, how many people have stood up to kings and governments and just gotten killed until now? I mean, this is like the 200-year span. We've only started to been able to have, like, you know, free speech and all that stuff. So I just think that it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of, not just like even arguments, but like genetic conditioning, where people who aren't genetically conditioned to submit to authority, they will get weeded out of like the whole population, and then we can eventually have freedom kind of take over.
Look at the American Revolution. With my minor in school was looking at that. If we as ANCAPs lived in that society, and basically there is such thing as a perfect state, something where
It's like blurry here.
that would have been the way to do it. But now look how far it's come, because everything always grows. It's like a cancerous tumor.
Yeah, it's really just about eliminating that cancer and seeing it for the threat that it is. Because as long as that cancer is present, your life is always going to be at a threat there.
So how do
we remove the cancer? Is that what you said?
Because I think I have a little different than you guys do, I think. Because I think that if we look back at the American Revolution, I think that if they would have set up a system after such brutality that happened during that war, set up a system that had no state. People would have been, kids that were growing up in that time would have been educated differently. There would have been a different paradigm within the people. Because at the end of the day, you have to remember, all the founders, positions of power, they were telling people what could and couldn't, like what to believe and what not. Freedom was the idea at the time. Everyone sided with the British. Only 10% of the people fought in the revolution. So this was a new idea to them, but they went along with it because they believed in these people.
Yeah, and I think we got a longer way right now, because I think 1% of people in this United States population believe the way we do, so we got quite a while before we even get to that 10%. But at the same time, I feel like just having these voluntary, peaceful interactions, having these discourses, even just every single time we use technology, you're supporting freedom. Just think if we can, like the theory of agorism is a really beautiful one, because all these people, like you were saying, how people just kind of went along with the norm. So what if these things like technology, Bitcoin, just became the norm? Then we defeat the state without having to fire a single shot.
And that's my point. And excellent point, Justin. How do we make that the norm?
We got. I think we got all the innovators on our side. We have. I think that.
Cash
Uh,
is still running for president, right, in 2020?
Kokesh, yeah. Well, what I was about to say is I think that the Silicon Valley boys, they're on our side. Their technology is the engine of freedom.
Okay, I mean, I hope you're right. I always say my greatest fear is that I'm right, and I
Yeah.
hope.
Anyone else have anything to add on to the theory of agorism?
Agorism? I don't know much about it, to be honest.
It's just
Agorism is essentially it's a theory where you find market alternatives to challenge the state's monopoly. So that's things like Bitcoin, growing your own food, using private arbitration, just ways that you can remove yourself from the system and challenge the state's monopoly so that it eventually loses its power and falls.
license plate off your
And
car.
removing from society too. And removing from society too, right?
Oh,
No,
that would be no.
no, because agorism wouldn't be removing yourself from society. It's just avoiding government interaction. So getting a job that only pays cash, or stuff like that.
Yeah, if you guys here, I have a little thing to say on this at least. So my dad is he's a local business person. He does upholstery in kind of around Northwest Florida, and he runs a business that my grandpa started after he got back from Korea, like in the 70s. So it's been around for a while. And you know, when you have businesses like that, if you really know what you're doing when it comes to like advertisement, you can turn it huge. But he's really not allowing himself to get that into it because he's a right-leaning libertarian. Like he likes Ted Cruz, like those guys. But you know, he is not allowing himself to reach his full potential because he doesn't want to be noticed by the government. He doesn't want to get audited or whatever because he pays a lot of people under the table and he tries not to, you know, do any of that taxation bullshit. And it's kind of I know that he's experiencing a moral quandary right now, and I am as well, because he just turned 55 the other day, and it's kind of like, you know, in 10 years you're going to be retirement age, or most people, and I don't know where you're at on your savings, but I feel like you probably want to build it up to the point where you can just step back and say, I'm going to go golfing for 3 weeks or for 3 months in another country, and he can't do that. He has every opportunity to do it because he's in a relatively wealthy area. You can, and upholstery is killer when it comes to business. Like you can have a lot of people pay you cash and you don't have to report that much, but he's letting the fact that the government taxes keep him from reaching his full potential, which really bums me out. But I really do think that agorism would be the perfect solution for him, but I don't think that that's anything that he'll end up embracing in his lifetime, unfortunately.
I see where you're coming with that, but I feel like once we see these cryptocurrencies really take off, I think that's going to be the way forward. And people like your grandfather that are trying to pay under the table and things of that nature, they'll be able to meet their full potential.
Also, also very hard because personal experience. I had a job last summer where I was making a lot of money and it was all cash.
Mm-hmm.
I did really well for myself, especially for a kid in college. Whatever. I graduate college and I go to get an apartment, and they want to see my pay stubs for the
You
year.
don't have any.
And basically, I have a few from working, the last 2 months or whatever on the books. But now I can't get an apartment. I can't get loans. I can't get all different things that the government up, these infiltration systems. So how are we going to fight the best way to fight against this? And I mean, it makes sense to me, but I think Roberto was saying, you have to go more towards an off-the-grid type scenario where you're not going to be such a avid member of society.
Yeah, and that's kind of what's annoying is it's a cycle. If you want to be an agorist and you want to do, and or you want to do what my dad does, you're kind of saying that I'm never going to succeed. I'm never going to get past, say, like 50 grand a year or something because you don't want to report it. And it's kind of a shame that you have to choose between, being successful and paying all that money or trying not to pay so much money or any money and being unsuccessful. So definitely there's kind of a problem there.
Speaking, I think that's a great point. Speaking as a pragmatist now, because I've been an ANCAP for 3 years, and before I would always say I'm never going to vote. I'm never going to do certain things. That now looking at it, seeing how fucked up this system is, that things like voting for Rand Paul. If Rand Paul gets the nomination, I'll tell you right now, I'm sorry, whatever you think about me, I'm going to vote for him, just because of the 14% flat. Because that's the only thing I can do. What else can we? I mean, I'm going to keep progressing towards educating people and bringing people towards the voluntarist movement. But practically, certain things have to be done, and we have to make sure it passes down the field at some point.
Man, if you're a slave and you get 30 whips a day, and there's a new slave owner that you can move to that only gives you 15, man, I'll do it.
Oh, yeah.
I'll vote for him. I mean, it's fine. And I understand I don't want to give people my consent, but if Rand Paul really does stick to his shit, then okay, that's fine. And 14% flat tax is pretty great in the grand scheme of things. And hopefully that will teach people that a little bit more freedom is the way to go. And then hopefully at that time, you'll have a little bit more people that are at least introduced to the idea of freedom and the idea of liberty. Unfortunately, the only thing that I'm worried about is if he gets a nomination, he's going to keep doing the same thing that everybody else has been doing, because there's always the theory that no matter who gets elected, the same people are running the country, and that might mar the name of libertarianism.
Now, do you think that in an attempt to lengthen the leash from the master, we should be taking a guy like a Rand Paul at his word? Or do you think that we should recognize that he's already flip-flopping on just about every single issue, so if he's corruptible now, what's he going to do as the most powerful man in the world?
I'm not going to actively endorse him, but I'll vote for him if he gets the nomination.
Their word, Rand Paul or Bernie Sanders?
Wait, say
I
that
don't
again?
know. Who would you rather take for their word, Rand Paul or Bernie Sanders?
Bernie.
Wait,
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
you would take
I don't
Bernie?
know.
At his word, like when I say take him at his word, I mean believe what he's saying. Believe he's actually principled.
Rather Rand Paul be lying.
Yeah, I agree with Justin. Yeah, Bernie Sanders.
I would
He just says it straight.
rather Rand Paul be lying than.
Well, that's an entirely different
that's a different
thought.
question.
Like, who would I rather? I would much rather Rand Paul be telling the fucking truth, and saying, and spreading.
No. What James just said is, would you rather have a Rand Paul who's lying, or would you rather have a Bernie Sanders who's telling the truth?
That's a good question.
Okay.
That is
Okay.
a good question.
I don't know.
Well,
No.
Pretty
I
interesting.
would rather have Bernie Sanders of 3 or 4 months ago that was telling the truth, that was pro-gun, and that was relatively pro-liberty. I really do think so. I mean, a liar is. I mean, a politician by definition is a liar at this point. but I would much rather have somebody that tells the truth than that lies, because if you're lying, you can be doing all sorts of shit. But if you're telling me the truth and you're saying, okay, I'm going to tax people at 90% and you can take me for my word, then at least I know what's coming. So,
James, I know that you recorded that video, James, where you were saying that you want the worst possible candidate to win, because I mean, if you think about it, it makes kind of logical sense. If you get a Rand Paul in there and even a Hillary or a Jeb, the changes would be so incremental that people wouldn't really wake up to it. If you get a Bernie Sanders in there taxing people at 90%, you'll see people leaving the country out the wazoo. All these companies, I mean, you see it right now, all the exoduses. You had Burger King just move to Canada. How many other corporations are going to want to head out of the country?
Yeah, but we're talking about our lives, and we're seeing that would there be a collapse in this country? And I swear to God, I hope there is one. But I don't think that coming next couple generations. I think that this system can sustain itself with the greed, with the bribery. I think it can sustain itself for maybe a century.
You don't think we'll see a dollar collapse before then?
I hope so. I hope it does. Don't know. We're thinking about our lives now, going into adulthood, starting families. I mean, do I want 14, where we could still spread the message and people can start to see getting off the government dole, how great.
Has anybody discussed how they went to the Liberty movement?
What was that?
Has anybody discussed about how they introduced themselves to the ideas of liberty?
How I was introduced to the ideas of liberty? That was
Yeah.
really, like I touched up on in the beginning of the show. I always adorned the word freedom. As a conservative, you see this ideal as freedom, but I think that this is why I have much better success converting, or at least putting a stone in the shoe of conservatives, because they love the word freedom. So if you're able to pinpoint those inconsistencies with them, saying, okay, you support freedom, but at the same time you support the existence of an institution that's by its very nature has to violate your freedom. So which do you value more? You can't balance freedom and slavery. It's one or the other.
Right. Right. My first exposure to the idea of liberty was like, out of all the places that exist right now, it would be at CPAC. It's funny because I took this quiz, their political quiz, and my result was libertarian. And at the time, I was like, your average conservative who voted for Romney, who voted for gay marriage, who voted for the Dream Act, stuff like that, God forbid, don't even know why I voted for such things. But that's besides the point. From there, I did a bit of research. I
Berto,
went minarchist for a while.
Berto, it's
Come
very,
again?
very important. Just sorry to cut you off. It's very important that you find out why you believe those things, so that when you meet things, you can sympathize with them.
Yeah, Roberto, didn't you go away this summer to South America and experience some tropical socialism? You want to tell us a little about that?
Don't mind if I do. Well, boys, that's the place that pretty much solidified my beliefs. And why? Because if you look at the state of that country right now,
Did we lose them?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh.
Roberto, are you there?
Well,
It's like he's frozen in time.
He's probably
Entering the
still
shadow
talking. He
realm.
has no idea.
hey, thank you. I appreciate all your points. They were really, guys made some really good points, and gonna make me think a little bit now.
Definitely.
I think at the end of the day, it really just comes down to our personal experiences and being able to relate to other people, just being inclusive, show that we have a lot more in common. This is really a common goal.
so as I was saying about
Sorry,
as I was
Roberto.
saying about Nico,
Yeah, good. Continue with your vacation.
as I was saying about Nicaragua, all I just did was just relax, actually read more libertarian literature like Betrayal of the American Right, which, oh my God, that whole week while I was there reading that book, it pretty much made me go ANCAP. Like, I was speechless by the time I read the first chapter of that book when he described the old right. That's something I heard about previously, but I never delved into it that deep until that week with that book. And at the same time, I was looking at socialism happening out everywhere. I saw shops being closed down, like at midnight or even earlier, because the government tells them to do so. I've heard stories about how local governments, they have a grid of every occupant that's living in each single house, every business too, even the foreign businesses too that currently occupy like the most popular spots of where my parents are from, which is Granada. And by the way, Granada is like the first permanent European settlement in the Americas. You can forget about Jamestown for a moment. It was actually us, my country. Granada still exists today too. I mean, if you go over there today, most of the architecture still exists. It still survives, despite a civil war that happened in the 70s and 80s. I figured that's Bernie Sanders' Sanders's future right there.
And why do you think it got a lot of people, when they talk about socialism, they look towards Europe as kind of the quote-unquote success of socialism, or always tend to be quiet on all its failures in South America? Why do you
You
think
know,
that is?
it's funny because Mac actually told me today, this morning, that the reason why most of the countries that are socialist, why they've been successful lately, is because they've actually started to deregulate recently. In
Hmm.
South America, deregulation is like a magical idea. When I say magical, it means something like people won't even think about it, because to them, free market economics is historically associated with conservatives, because they're usually the ones who spearheaded those things, while torturing dissents, pretty much harassing anybody who doesn't think exactly like them. I mean, it didn't even happen just only in my country. It happened in Mexico. It happened in the Dominican Republic. It happened in Brazil. It happened in Argentina. It even happened in Chile too. Whereas in Chile, compared to the rest of Latin America, they've been performing so well in terms of economics, thanks to the ideas of Milton Friedman and such, and the Chicago Boys too, whom, by the way, that's where they got their ideas from Friedman, Milton Friedman.
You were in Costa Rica too, correct?
Yeah, I did.
They don't even have a standing army.
They don't. It's a very chill country there. But even though I heard that they have socialized healthcare, and it's a very expensive place to live in. But I did see a couple of poor people living there, though, so I wouldn't exactly call it paradise. But if you go to the beaches and stuff, that's definitely paradise. But if you go somewhere like San Jose, you can make up your own mind on it.
Guys, I just wanted to say one more time, I'm going to go watch these debates just to laugh my ass off.
You just reminded me that I forgot to DVR it.
And you can watch them on YouTube.
Yeah, man. No, that reminds me of like the State of the Union. Jesus, like I said, out of my group of friends, everybody knows me as the anarchist, and the fucking
too,
State
by
of the
the way.
Union. I mean, Jesus,
Oh yeah,
like Jesus,
guys, I got a quick fact.
yeah,
Nicaragua was actually the very first country to sign the UN Charter.
really.
Yeah, it wasn't the U.S. It was actually Nicaragua who did it. And at the time, they were actually heavy allies to the United States. And why is that? Because the United States actually invaded Nicaragua back in the 20s under Coolidge. And that's one of the reasons why, the Sandinistas, they're still in power today too, because of all those events.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah,
Sure.
we
You
can.
hear it, Dan?
All right, cool. My phone just said you left this call, so
Oh,
I guess
that's
it's lying to
weird.
me. Anyways, no, I mean like I said, my friends all know me as the anarchist. So like they just watched me watch the State of the Union, just like I don't know, like trembling out of just. I was so goddamn furious, just because there was just so much misinformation, and he was just talking so much shit, saying, talking about the wage gap and things like that, things that have already been kind of noted as fallacies, like by basically anybody that's willing to do any amount of research. But I don't know, it just made me so mad. So I feel like I'm going to be a little bit less annoyed by these though, if I catch the end of them. But I don't know.
You've been a voluntarist for how long, Liam?
I don't know. I was originally a libertarian, and I had been a libertarian for probably like 2 to 3 years, like minarchist.
Mm-hmm.
But I joined the New Gateway anarchist page kind of on a whim because I don't even know. I looked up. I think I had a friend or something that was on there. I don't even remember honestly, but I joined it with my now vice president of my Young Americans for Liberty chapter, and we just kind of did it for shits and giggles, kind of to learn about it and talk about it over lunch and stuff like that. But it basically ended up, again, it was kind of the cognitive dissonance. We realized that, that's a better way of thinking than how we were thinking, because we were saying like, okay, well, this kind of violence is okay, and this, this kind of slavery is okay. But, and I almost left immediately because one of the guys called me a statist, and I was just like, son of a bitch. So I like the mouse was on the leave group button, but I was just like, whatever, I'll lurk for a little bit. And at this point, I'm probably like 100 of my friends are from that group for
Wow.
one reason or another. So they're pretty cool. I mean, like I did that, and not like personal friends. There's probably about 20 or so that I would just kind of talk to on a regular basis or comment on their photos or something. But I also just did it because I would post a whole bunch of anarchist shit, and it would just be like falling on deaf ears. So it's nice to have people commenting and actually, talking about it on my profile there.
So since you've probably been in ANCAP a little longer than myself, then what's kind of since we're all college students here, with the exception of Dan, what would you recommend as kind of a good campus activism for spreading awareness? Because I've only been in ANCAP for 5 months now, so this will be my first real time trying to get on campus and get the message out there.
Yeah.
Honestly, Justin, I think that we've been in camps for around the same time. I guess
Really?
I didn't explain myself perfectly correctly. So I was a college freshman this past year, and I probably joined that group in the fall. And I said, I posted something on there, and I said, I'm still a libertarian. I'm still voting for Rand Paul. Blah blah blah. And they said. And like all of them had the same spiel, and it's so true. And they said the difference between a libertarian and an anarchist is about
6 months.
3 to 6 months, and that was perfect, like right on. So honestly, you've probably been an anarchist for a longer time. However, I do think that just personally talking to people, at least me, because maybe I'm a little friendlier than some, or I'm a little more relatable than some. I feel like that's the best way to kind of get the seed planted in somebody's mind. Commenting on Facebook can kind of be like calling somebody out, because I feel like if there's somebody that posts a pro-police argument, or somebody that posts like an Occupy thing, or somebody that posts like "Go Bernie Sanders is going to make school free," it's as if you're however many friends you have, say you got 400 friends, it's like you're in an auditorium and you're just speaking into a microphone to 400 people that honestly don't really give a shit. But still, if you stand up in the middle of the crowd and say that's bullshit and here's why, they're going to feel like you're attacking them, regardless of how you say it. So
that's kind of why I feel like it's probably most important for us to be able to learn and best utilize that nonviolent communication, because at the end of the day, if we come off as arrogant and hostile, then any time these statists look at our philosophy, they're always going to connect that with our hostility, and they're never really going to take the philosophy seriously. So we want to be able to put a stone in their shoe and get a good taste in their mouth.
Yeah. See anarcho-communism for that, by the way. Yeah. Because honestly, go ahead.
Indeed, it's pretty debilitating. I mean, that's why I refrain from using like cliches like, "Oh, if you don't like this country, leave." Oh,
yeah.
Stuff like that doesn't even suffice. I'm just asking them questions like, "Who told you this? What made you think this way? How do you know this?" Stuff like that.
Are you guys familiar with the Socratic method at all?
Yeah, I am.
Just kind of let them talk.
Yeah, well, Socratic method is really like when you're going to engage in a dialogue, you're presenting this new philosophy to them. They're going to want to ask you the questions, whereas the Socratic method is, let's turn that around. We've already gone through the thinking. We don't really need to apply these the same way again, so turn that around and question them. Put the burden of thought on them to be able to work out these inconsistencies.
Believe it or not, I was taught that method in my physics class, and I actually like that method.
Well, it's all scientific method, so there you go.
Right, indeed. Yeah.
So, when's Patrick? You think he's coming or not?
I haven't heard from him, so I would assume he probably didn't get service. So we'll try to get him on.
Maybe next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess last thing before we close up, since we've been on here for about an hour and a half now, let's as I was saying earlier, I'm able to connect with conservatives much easier than liberals, just for the fact that their ideal is freedom. how do you guys have any success with getting the message across to liberals who have a message that's completely antithetical to freedom, and they're not looking for you to have control over your own life?
Well, it's actually funny because on Twitter, I have all kinds of people following me, from feminists to conservatives to that particular group of Republicans that I always have beefs with and whatnot. But, I don't mean any disrespect. I love challenging people, but sometimes I do get somebody who doesn't think like me, who does say stuff like, you do present a fresh perspective, and that's why I follow you. And that's what I really want to do now.
Yeah.
That's actually one of my goals, just presenting something fresh, not the same old thing, like it's a broken record player. No.
Yeah, definitely.
You
I
know
agree
what?
with that as well.
Go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And another thing, I think that with Republicans, you kind of have a couple of different categories, maybe. I mean, there's different categories of everybody, and to lump somebody into one adjective, I guess, is kind of, it's not really going to help. But I mean, you've got the fascist Republicans, and you've kind of got the more millennial Republicans, and libertarian-leaning Republicans. But the fascist Republicans, you're not gonna get through to them ever.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah, they're the
Tell me
kinds.
about it.
Yeah, they're going to be the kinds. The same kind of people that were giving you shit, man, is saying, the police can do no wrong. If the police do this, you better
But you
listen
know
to them.
what? I beg to differ. I came from that background. I was a neocon. I had that
I was a
pro-authority
neocon, too.
mentality.
I was a neocon too, and for the
Yeah.
longest time, I legitimately thought that the police, even as a minarchist, I thought it was legit. It was a legitimate kind of authority that
Yeah.
should exist no matter what.
So you know what? I
Yeah.
think what differs, though, at least for you and I, Roberto, is that we went out of our way seeking these new ideas. We wanted to challenge ourselves, whereas these other people, they're not looking for that. So that's why it's groundbreaking and revolutionary that we have to open up people's minds themselves. And that's
and that's
a big
part of the
challenge.
problem. Is there are the kind of people that are neocons and that would support the police, but they're the people that you're going to actually be able to have a proper conversation with, a productive conversation with, are the ones that are like you guys, that have an open mind, that want to kind of learn a little bit more. Because you can have an open mind and be a neoconservative. It's not going to be the most open mind in the world, but you're going to see what you believe as the only way to go about doing it. Like, okay, we might have to have an army because of this, and we might have to have a police force because of this, and we might have to totally ban drugs because people can't deal with their shit. Whatever, whatever you want to say, whatever you want to say to justify it. But when you're keeping an open mind, and you're able to have conversations with people like that, it's a little different than like my grandma, who's going to be, yelling at me every chance that she gets, and happy that I get a speeding ticket, like that kind of stuff. And I'm just like, you should be terrified that I almost got shot today, Grandma. But and that's. Go ahead.
Unlike other people, even as a minarchist, I do remember moments when I did open my eyes up to certain things. Like, well, for example, like today I was talking to that Republican girl about how FDR provoked the Pearl Harbor attack. And I remembered back in December, I was disagreeing with Mac about this. He was actually the first one to tell me that sanctions are an act of war. Now, I wasn't hostile to it. In fact, I thought about it a bit for like a couple more months until today, when I actually did agree with it. But it's not like, boom, I had agreed with it all of a sudden.
The people that are typically going to say that sanctions aren't an act of war, I think maybe the best way to connect with them there is realize that if the Soviet Union does that, when the Soviet Union was placing sanctions on Poland, they recognized that as an act of war. If Iran placed sanctions on us today, or Putin, for God's sake, did the same thing, I'm sure they would recognize that as an act of war.
If you look
why is the United States government, why aren't they held to the same standard there?
If you look up the definition of a sanction, it's crystal clear that it's actually a act of war. It doesn't say it. It doesn't say that it's an act of war, but the definition does paint it
Yeah,
as a.
I just looked it up right now. Here we go. Sanction, quote, a threatened penalty for disobeying a law or rule.
Duh! I mean, it's an act of war right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
So
how
as
have
our
any of you guys had success with trying to get through to liberal progressives?
Oh
local-
man.
It's
No
difficult.
way.
I really do think that they're further entrenched
Yeah.
in the idea of statism than a run-of-the-mill Republican is. I really
Yeah.
do think that.
Because they
I
aren't
think that
skeptical of government.
Yeah,
Well,
'cause
again-
the Republican is a military and police state away from being at least a libertarian, I think. Because it seems like, like I just said, my grandpa is 82, 83 years old. He was in the Korean War, and he's not going to budge on the idea that we need the military for this and this and that. But he told me before I even asked him that marijuana should be legal. Or he said, well, it's not long before it's going to be legal. And then I said, well, what do you think about that? And he looked at me like, and I just said, well, I think that it's the same kind of thing as alcohol, and if anything, it's less debilitating, and this and that, and you guys know the facts. So he was just like, well, then I think it's totally fine. So
Dog,
it's
And I think now from our discussion last night when we were talking about just the possibilities that hemp represents, we see that it was illegalized just for the fact that the United States wanted to. It was protectionism. They were protecting the timber industry, the pharmaceutical companies.
newspaper companies too.
Just
William
big business
Randolph.
in general.
Yeah.
that was a
Well-
real big one. William Randolph Hearst, for sure.
Yeah, indeed. That guy was the one who spearheaded that movement right there.
hmm
Of course, yeah. And I think I'd love to see like an approximation of how many new jobs would be created if marijuana was completely legal when it came to dealing and growing and hemp use and things like that, and also how
Definitely
much cheaper
want-
things would get. Sorry?
Yeah.
I definitely don't want the drug to be taxed.
I think.
Oh yeah,
think-
I
Yeah.
don't either, and
At least-
that's why, I had this conversation with a friend of mine. I think it was just a friend I was giving a ride to, and we had a quick conversation about it. But I said, I almost don't want it to be legalized because of that. But you also have to think about, would you rather have a small tax on it, or would you rather the possibility of you being thrown in jail for 10 or 20 years over it? So
Yeah.
I think that a tax is better than that. I think that theft is better than locking somebody in a cage for X amount of years. It's still not a good thing, but I still do think that that any amount of taxation is still going to be better than just locking somebody in a cage.
Yeah. Anytime you can open the door to even a little more economic freedom, that's one step closer to a free society.
Definitely, and we can all, you can always be a critic as well as a proponent of something and say,
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be legalized, but don't tax the bitch. There's no reason to do it. But if that's the way to get it to the point where we can talk about non-tax legalization or an abolishment of the sales tax, then sure, let's do that. We can make it a little bit more economically free while still keeping a sales tax. And then say, okay, so look at what we just did and how much better it got, and let's see how much better we can make it.
Yeah, I think
And-
Colorado's the perfect example of that. There, they opened it up.
Yeah,
and
people-
they have a boondoggle. They're thriving.
Yeah, people got money back in their taxes
that's
from
true.
Colorado because they tax us so much, I'm pretty sure. And they're, I hate to say it, but their public education system is just fucking bar none at the moment just because of the amount of money that they took in. Because I'm pretty sure a lot of that taxation went towards public education.
Yeah.
So, and again, I'm not a big proponent of it, but if you're, they definitely kind of struck a good mark when it comes to keeping the same kind of system, but still kind of working within it and making it successful. And, I don't mind if it's going to make the kids smarter to, have a little bit more money put into that system, and then that's fine. If we're not going to get rid of the Department of Education, we can still, we can still make things better within the system. And I hate I understand the big joke that anarchists always like to make is like, if you don't like something, join the system and work within it. I'm definitely not saying that or proposing that or anything like that, but I do think that
Use it to your
it's
is what you're
Yeah,
getting at.
exactly. Yeah, and you can say, like, if we had a more free system and we didn't have so much taxation, I mean, imagine if you had 60% more money every year, because that's really, if you think about the 30-ish% tax that we more than likely get, because I don't think anybody here is making above like 50,000 a year, at least I don't think so. You have that, you have gas tax, you have sales tax, you have liquor tax,
Yeah.
smoke, tobacco tax, and things like that. In Virginia, you got a grocery tax. I'm sure in Maryland, you got some crazy ass taxes.
I think
And
even if you throw if you throw aside the notion for a second that taxation is theft, I think if we look at it from a purely economical stance and think of the taxation as investment, just think of it like the whole Austrian notion is that it's better for the economy if you save. So just think like if all this taxation is investment now, think of how much if you save you'd be able to spend tomorrow and be more productive in the future. How much earlier would you be able to retire?
Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, it's silly for people to think that anything other than Austrian economics is the way to go. It's just stepping the fuck out of the way and letting the market do its thing. And it's kind of it's annoying, and I hate it's another thing that liberals kind of have a problem with is they seem to think that only with government can we have a checked system where we don't have people that are it's like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle.
Yeah.
Like that's the only like government is the only thing keeping us, but between this and the jungle. And I don't think that with the kind of technology that we have today, the kind of economic freedom that we have today, the kind of knowledge that we're able to get just out of a quick Google search, and that's you can go buy an Android phone for $20 and have the internet in the palm of your hand for less than $1 a day. It's insane, and nobody thinks about it. And I'm just like, what would happen if we didn't have those freer constraints that kind of started in the 1980s that brought us to the smartphones that we're all holding in our hands or in our pockets that allow us to get further in life and allow us to be a little bit more productive. So I really do think that just that should be one of the ways that we can kind of combat that. And there's not really a lot of progressives are still going to say, oh well, I think that that's bullshit or whatever. But again, it's kind of winning on principle. They can say that they won that argument, but you won the argument if you present your case properly.
I think that kind of segues well into my last question I had before we can wrap this up, since we've been speaking a little while now. But do you think that traditional schooling and education is on its way out with all the advances in modern technology?
Yeah.
Because just think about it, like Liam said, if you can get a smartphone now for under $1 a day, be connected to the whole internet, that's it. Like you talk about how competition drives down costs of education, and you see it there with the free market. You're educated. Like a lot of people hinge on the belief that you need government because without government, how are the poor going to get education? Well, just get yourself a smartphone for $1 a day, and you can look at all these wonders. You can educate yourself. You can reach out to people for free through social media to try to make connections and educate yourself that way, like we're doing here today.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, like, I don't remember the exact statistic, but I remember seeing that the amount of information that we see looking through our phones in one day is exponentially more than the amount of information that somebody would see in their entire lives 50 years ago.
That sounds believable.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I mean it's definitely I'd put my money on it. But if somebody has that ability to do that from like I said, almost nothing, no amount of money, or to go and buy a Raspberry Pi Linux computer for $20 and hook that bitch up to a TV that you bought for $80 at Walmart, that's like less than $100, and you can do so many things like a desktop computer type thing. You can go to school on that, and you don't need to have the biggest, best Hewlett Packard or whatever to do that. But part of the problem is kind of how consumerism today affects people, and the Black Friday economy and all that stuff, and just the general again, the general apathy that people have towards certain things and certain issues, and people always want the newest and the best, and I'm guilty of that as well because I'm holding a $700 phone in my hand that I paid outright for. But I also sell phones, so I got a reason for that.
And
But
with the market of economies, even if they're not getting the best today, they're going to have the second best, and what's best today, they'll have tomorrow.
yeah, and that's kind of how it is. Is there's always, it's pure capitalism. Do I want this $700 phone, or do I want to buy the $300 phone, put that $400 in my pocket and get something else with it, or invest it, or do something like this? It's purely voluntary action. You can be a good capitalist and you can be a bad capitalist.
And you know what? When you're a bad capitalist, you learn from your consequences, and you're able to make better, rational decisions next time.
Now, when you're a bad capitalist, your name's Bernie Sanders. But it's but I definitely think that the amount of information that we're able to see now is just so much more than I feel like. I've been out of school now for it's been probably a year and a half because I graduated early. Out of quote unquote public school, because public university is definitely a different beast than public K through 12 education, because I really do think that is just a whole different kind of indoctrination. Partially because people aren't old enough to really take a step back, and their minds aren't they're not developed enough to see that they're kind of being indoctrinated.
I think that even at that age too, you're so worried about just your social image that you don't really take the time to consider the material you're actually learning in school. You put all your rationale behind your social life, and you don't stop to consider and just rationally deduce everything that they're teaching you.
Definitely, and I think that more and more people are starting to realize that. I hope, and it's the plague of progressivism that seems to think that if we pump more money into something, it's going to be better. And I also realize that sounds like it contradicts what I just said about putting more money into the Colorado school system, and I'll tell you why it's not like that. And it's because, that might make it a little bit better because, they're able to give their kids iPads and all that stuff. But if you're still teaching them the same bullshit that comes down from the state level that then comes down from the government level, and you're requiring them to buy or at least read from these government-approved $500 textbooks from the monopolistic textbook companies and things like that, you're not allowing them to think for themselves. You're not teaching them how to think, but rather what to think, and that's the problem that I have with public schooling. If public schooling taught you how to think instead of what to think, then we'd be so much better.
There was a few times where public schools actually did teach me how. As I was saying, there were a few times. A few teachers actually taught me how to think, but they were like in English and math classes. But
and
other than that,
and that's a lot of people have those. A lot of people have those examples, but it's always despite something. Like they taught you that despite what they were supposed to. So I still think that it's the way to go is to be taught by your parents or to be taught by your community. And I think that the rise of the community, which definitely hasn't happened yet, I feel like it's still falling in importance to people. But once the community and the family unit kind of comes back, and that'll only really happen when people kind of start, Stefan Molyneux really talks about this as well, is the lack of the father figure. And you can have a father figure in a gay couple, lesbian couple, whatever, but just the lack of, a multitude of adults that have had a multitude of experiences throughout their lives, teaching you, how to live your life and how to do it respectfully of other people, and how to do it, successfully when it comes to your personal success and how you lead your life, and how successful you might end up being. That's it's so silly, in public school they don't even teach you how to pay your taxes, which is what pays for the public school.
That's
you
a real
know?
good point
Yeah.
there.
It's insane because I mean it's like they just want to keep you there to shove some shit down your throat that doesn't even matter.
Yeah, you're a
And it's
cookie cutter.
like
And there's
yeah.
also with public schools is that there's such an emphasis on this collective identity that, at least if there's going to be some sort of schooling, I think it would be an integral part to include some sort of mandatory economics class to understand the whole praxeology behind individual human action and how individuals act. Collectives don't. The collective is an imaginary figure.
Yeah, and when you get into your bigger cities and stuff like that, they do have some usually optional economics classes, but from what I can tell, they're kind of bullshit. They don't really touch on anything
Oh,
other than
even
kind of Keynesian.
even when I just had my freshman year of college, I retook microeconomics, and even then, my professor, like, she's working out on the board how the minimum wage creates a surplus of labor, and thereby there's a lot of unemployment. But then she ends it by saying, "But it's still good." I just don't get it. Like, is she that willfully ignorant, or is she in on the scam?
I don't know, man. That's kind of part of the problem is people, they kind of just become robots and slaves to this machine, and they
Yeah,
don't.
that's like why I was saying earlier. You don't need a government that points guns at everyone's heads physically when you have all these indoctrinated people that will do it for them.
Exactly, and that's kind of part of the problem is you see everybody else kind of waving the flag and walking the walk, and you're just like, well, I guess if they're doing it, then I should do it, and they've got some kind of point. And
The funny part is they all think the same thing. They like no one's actually thinking like, yeah, I should just follow what they say. like they're just doing it because other people are.
Guys, check out my latest tweet after this chat, man.
All right.
Check it.
Oh my god. What
You
did
saw
say?
it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but that actually raises a good point about the TSA. Just imagine if there were no TSA and you could have real private security at airports, how much more efficient that would be.
And how much more safe it would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There wouldn't even be lines of, you know how, you guys may have not experienced this, but I have. Like every time I go out of the country, like every time I enter, I always have to wait in a line with a multitude of people, like just to get out of the airport.
That's
like,
why, that's why, like Rothbard says in his book For New Liberty, every time you wait on some sort of like, even when you're on a road, when there's a line and government is involved in that monopoly, you're waiting on a government line. So when you're on a road in traffic, it's essentially akin to waiting on a bread line.
Yeah, definitely. And they're taking that time away from you.
Yeah.
It's funny because I don't experience that on a longboard.
Free travel,
Yeah. Man. I gotta get into that.
I need roads for my longboard.
Oh my god.
Oh, that's a problem.
Justin, make a note. I really want to talk about right to travel next time we do this. So try to make a note.
Well, we'll try doing another one maybe next week or week after that. We'll try to get in some more before the summer's over.
Definitely. I've got, starting like tomorrow, I've got just this 2-week period. I'll have family visiting, but I've got no school right now, which is rare. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we ready to call tonight?
Wait, I got one more next question.
All right, go ahead.
How are we going to build the roads?
I don't know, man.
Who will build
I can't figure it out. It's too difficult to do.
I think we just should point guns at people.
Well, obviously, somebody out there, they must have the ingenuity to tell themselves whenever they're looking at a dirt road or some grass maybe, and they'll say, hey, how can I make this more smooth? I mean, that's how it starts.
You know what? And here in New Jersey, I think the same thing with all the potholes. No one ever thinks in the back of their head, how can I make this road more safe? How can I fill these potholes?
Yeah. Every time I skate around crap roads, I always think to myself, how can this be more cleaner, you know?
Yeah,
So I
man.
don't fall on my ass.
I think I read somewhere on the internet recently that with all these potholes and the way that the governments make the road dangerous, it actually ends up costing the average car owner about $5,000 a year in damages.
Dude,
Jesus,
just
really?
imagine how much money they would be saved if those potholes didn't exist at least.
Mm-hmm.
Who's
Yeah.
to know that asphalt is the most best material to use?
Yeah, who knows?
Exactly, yeah. I can tell you
We
right
should
now
be
it
on
fucking
record.
isn't, but that's another show.
All right, I want to thank all you guys for joining the chat tonight. It was really awesome. I thank all the viewers that are either watching live or watching the tape on YouTube. Make
Wait,
sure
how
you
many viewers
subscribe
do
to the
we have?
YouTube channel. What was that?
How many viewers do we have?
We hit 4 at one point. We're down to 1. It's probably still Mac.
What's up, Mac?
I want to thank Mac for being a loyal viewer tonight, and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, check out libertyhangout.org, and we will see you next time.